A dog's personality, just like people's, can change over time. These changes, especially if they go from gentle to aggressive, can be disconcerting and stressful. This is our topic for today. Why does a dog change from friendly to growly? I'm Randy Rossman, certified as a dog behavior consultant with 2 industry organizations and have worked with dogs with behavior challenges for the last 10 years. In this series, we took questions from various dog lovers. Today's topic question comes from Deborah, whose dog Rena used to snuggle up with people and now will snap at those very same people. In this video, I'll discuss the framework and questions that I asked during an assessment to understand a situation like this, so you'll start to get a feeling for how these types of behaviors are evaluated and behavior plans develop based on that individual dog in that specific environment. And if you stick through to the end of the video, as a bonus, I'll give you 3 things you can do to make your dog more comfortable if they are uncomfortable or distressed with people inside the home. As a caveat, both ethically and pragmatically, I can't offer specific advice for this dog, or for any dog, without doing an assessment to understand the dog's history and current environment. What you will get out of this is just some general information and knowledge, plus an understanding of the scientific framework that we use to evaluate, assess, and develop behavior plans for dogs. Approaching a behavior change like this is a bit like detective work. It would be awesome if we could ask Rena what the problem was, but, alas, dogs can't answer those kind of questions. But if you start to understand how dogs communicate and the basics of the science underlying behavior, we can make an educated guess about what's going on and build a behavior plan based on that. So the first thing that's important to know is that Rena may have been giving clues along the way that something was not right, and no one noticed until she began to growl and snap. This is so common. So many dogs start off with very subtle behaviors to show discomfort, and as each of these behaviors are either ignored or punished, they start to climb and do the next behavior that's along the ladder of aggression. This is a diagram that was developed by the British Small Animal Veterinary Association that illustrates this ladder of aggression. The first thing I want to get is a very clear picture of the behavior. Now, Deborah said in her form that she snaps at people who she used to be comfortable with. Well, I would want to know, what did her behavior used to look like? What does used to be comfortable with look like? That could be defined very differently by different people. So did Rena used to jump in the person's lap and snuggle? Did she show signs of being happy and excited to see that person? All those behaviors indicate something different, and so it's important to understand what exactly used to be comfortable look like. A lot of times used to be comfortable is actually showing early signs of distress and discomfort. Then I'd want to understand what the difference is. How is she actually behaving now? Does she snap at everyone? What else does she do that tells Deborah she no longer likes people? Does she snap when someone touches her? Does she snap when someone approaches her? Does she snap when someone leans over her? What are all the things that are happening around her that indicate that she's about ready to snap? Different people, different places, number of people in the house. Did something get her riled up earlier in the day, and so now she's aroused? Does the dog do the behavior all the time, or just with different type of approaches? Like I said, if you reach out to her, if you pick her up, if you put her in a lap, if someone's holding the dog in their arms, it's a small dog, and someone approaches her. What are all those different things that happen in the environment? What are those environments that cause this behavior to happen? There's so many elements to consider. What we're looking for here is, what are those things that happen before the behavior starts? That's a key thing that we analyze all the time. What is happening before the behavior that triggers the behavior? This is called an antecedent, which is basically everything that comes before a behavior And in our detective mode, we're trying to suss out which elements are the things that triggers the dog's behavior. Once we understand that, then we understand a big component of the behavior plan and what we're going to work with in order to address this with dogs. The next thing we want to know is what happens right after the behavior. What do you do? Do you yell at the dog? Do you grab and pick up the dog? Do you distract the dog with a treat? Do you just sit and watch the dog and wait till they're done? This is called the consequence of the behavior, and what you do in that moment has a huge impact on what the dog does when they're in that situation again. So these three things together, the antecedents, the behaviors, and the consequences, are the ABCs of behavior science and creates a framework for doing our detective work. What happens before? What does the behavior exactly look like? And what happens right after? All three of these need to be taken into consideration to develop a plan. Now that we've established what the framework is to look at behaviors like this, we can get back to the original question, which is, why did my dog's behavior change? To be honest though, sometimes we may never fully know the why. Fortunately, it's not completely necessary to know that in order to change behavior. But if we can get to the why, it helps us understand our dogs better. Often, it helps us humans be a lot more patient with our dog. The three most common reasons that a dog's behavior may change from friendly to growly over time are developmental, medical, and experiential. Just like humans, dogs go through developmental stages. Sometimes those stages take them from friendly to not so friendly. Some behavior traits that are genetic, like fear or aggression, may not show themselves in some dogs until they hit a certain age. This typically happens at social maturity, which ranges from 1.5 years to 3 years, depending on the dog and the breed. So the next thing that may impact a behavior change is something medical. Behavior changes like these may indicate an underlying medical condition. Pain, GI distress. There's a number of different issues that may contribute to a change in behavior. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. We humans also can get pretty grumpy if we're feeling poorly. Dogs are the same way. And say if your back was out and your kid jumped on you, you could say, hey, don't do that. And because it hurt, you may say it a bit sharply, like maybe growl a little bit at them. And the next time your kid walks past you, you might swerve away a little bit to avoid them jumping on you. What happened with your kid jumping on you and that causing pain is going to change your behavior potentially the next time if your back still hurts. Well, dogs are the same, but their words of grumpiness, instead of, hey, stop that, don't want you to do that, their grumpiness are shown in growls and snaps. Now, a lot of dogs are pretty stoic, so there are sometimes only very subtle signs, and it may only be these signs of behavior change, like grumpiness, that says that there's something medical going on. If you're not looking for them, it's really super easy to miss. I had a client with 2 dogs, and one recently had started to become aggressive to the second dog. The aggressive dog did have arthritis, but it was being managed and controlled with medication. At first, started to get suspicious that it might be that the dog's arthritis had gotten worse from their description of when it started. When the younger dog would walk past the aggressive dog in a narrow hallway or in areas of the house that were narrow and could have been inadvertent touching or brushing up against each other. When I brought up the potential of pain, at first they were kind of hesitant. They didn't think so. They had gone to the vet recently and gotten new medication. Things seemed to be fine. She wasn't limping or whining or crying anymore. But as we talked, they started to remember some other things about her behavior. She no longer jumped up on the bed. She used to love to jump on the ottoman while the man was reading in the comfy chair, and she no longer did that. So they took her to the vet, and yep, her arthritis had gotten worse. They changed her medication, and there was an immediate improvement in the behaviors. Just because you change the underlying medical condition, the behavior often won't completely go away and often still requires some sort of training or behavior work. On the other hand, if I tried to work on the behavior problem without them addressing the underlying medical condition, chances are we would have very little success in addressing the problem. The final bucket of things that may have impacted the behavior change is that there may have been an experience or a series of experiences that scared the dog. And that is most typically what underlies snapping, growling, biting, barking, lunging behavior. Not always, but most of the time it's fear. It's the dog saying, stay away, I don't want you near me, I'm afraid of you, I don't want you to be doing what it is that you're doing. Unfortunately, fear is super easy to install. Sometimes it just takes one time. What's really important to note, and a common myth out there, that if a dog is afraid of a person, that they've been abused in some way. And that is not necessarily true. It may be that a person did absolutely nothing to the dog. It could be that the person was there and something scary happened, like a loud noise, and the dog associated it with that person. That person brought this bad, scary noise, and so I'm afraid of the person because that person brings noises. These situations can be really hard to figure out because for all intents and purposes, no one was mean to the dog, but yet the dog is afraid of the person. It could be that there's some underlying weird connection that happened that you may never be able to figure out. Fortunately, like I said before, we don't always have to know exactly what happened there. But I just wanted to make it clear that just because a dog was good with people and now they're afraid of people, that does not mean that there was any sort of abuse. It also could be that it didn't have to be something big and major. It could be something minor that the dog didn't like that happened consistently over time, so that the dog went from tolerating it to annoyed, and then irritable, and then really grumpy. I worked with a dog who was fine when she was rescued, but after a month, she started to become aggressive to the women in the house. It turned out that one of the women was the key person brushing her every day, and during the assessment, we figured out that the dog was not into being touched yet. So the dog went from, okay, I don't like this, but I'll tolerate it. This person's really nice to me, so I'll sit through this, to over time, okay, enough. I don't want you to do this. Get away from me. When the owner of the dog didn't stop, the dog became more insistent and started growling, grumping, and got to the point eventually where even when the woman approached her, the dog would start barking and growling and snapping. Because what the dog wanted to have happen is for the person not to come near her with that brush. So this is a really common typical pattern, especially with small dogs, and you have to remember the original dog that prompted this question was Rena, who is a small dog. These are minor things that grew over time because the dog was not listened to. Mostly because we don't understand these more subtle forms of behavior communication that the dog is stressed out. It happens even more with smaller dogs because we forgive a lot of things in smaller dogs that we would never forgive in a larger dog. If a larger dog starts barking or growling at you, you're going to put a stop to it. You don't want an 80-pound dog growling at you. But a 15-pound dog, some people laugh at that. Some people think it's cute. It makes sense that we overlook these behaviors because they're really subtle. They're hard to notice, and a lot of us don't even know that that is what that body language means. You've made it to the end of the video, so here are 3 things you can do if you think your dog is starting to show discomfort or aggression to people when they never have been before. The first thing you can do is start to use the consent test to see if your dog likes being touched or not. So here's a video of a great dog behavior blogger, Eileen Anderson. This is a consent test to see whether your dog is enjoying being touched or petted. And the reason why we want to do this is because these communication signals can be very subtle. Eileen's original video and blog has a ton of information and slow motion of what the dog looks like and what all those subtle symbols are. So what you want to do is have your dog relaxed in a place where they can get away if they want, pet them in some place where they typically like it, and then move your hand away. Does the dog lean back in to be touched? Zany says no. Now with a different dog, a dog that wants to be petted and touched, when Eileen moves her hand away from Summer, Summer moves her head right back in because she wants to continue to have that pet. So this helps you develop an understanding of whether your dog likes to be touched or not by observing their behavior. I've linked to the full blog in the description below. Something we all sometimes forget is that even dogs that love affection don't always want to be touched. If they want to be petted, they'll let you know by asking for more if you stop petting them. The second thing is not to force your dog to interact with people that they're uncomfortable with. Don't force your dog to interact with those people. Ask people not to reach, look, or touch your dog. Don't even let them give your dog a treat or something that they like. Now, this can be harder than it sounds because so many people think that they are the exception to this. All dogs love me. Some dogs will show improvements just with this change alone. The dog gets that nobody that comes into the house is going to mess with them, so there's no reason to be alarmed or growl or snap anymore. The third thing is to have a spot in the home where no one ever bothers or touches the dog, so the dog knows if I go into this bed, I will be completely left alone. Here's a picture of a client dog who is barking and growling at the kids in the home. They made this bed her safe spot, which was easy for the kids and guests to understand. If the dog is in the bed, don't pay any attention to her, don't go over to her. That's her telling us she wants to be left alone. It gave the dog something important, an alternative behavior to do that was more acceptable to the people in the house. Instead of barking or growling, she could go to her bed and the same thing would happen. Nobody would come near her. Have you ever had a dog change and couldn't figure out why? Or did you know why the dog's behavior changed over time? Post in the comments below. I hope you found this information helpful. I'll be posting answers to questions like this every Tuesday. If you have any questions, post below and I might choose your question for one of these videos. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.